Hi, I'm a small farmer and I want to talk about a big new idea in American agriculture, and that is RFK Jr.'s rehab ranches. If you haven't heard about these, this is a bright new idea to take people who are struggling with mental health problems, addiction, and other issues, and send them to organic farms. To work it out, work with their hands, smell the fresh air, connect with the earth, and heal. Now, believe it or not, this is not a new idea. In fact, I have worked on multiple farms where most of the crews were prisoners who were brought there to work because a lot of people believe that sending defective people to farms to work will fix them. Teach them valuable life and career skills. So I want to talk about what actually happens on those farms. So my first job turned out to be on a rehab farm. I had just responded to a help wanted ad. I wanted a job and I was 14, and so working on farms is the only job that legally can hire you at that point. We lived in Iowa. So the job I got was detasseling corn. I talk more about that job in a different video. We don't need to go into detail on that here. But the way it worked was there would be a school bus that would pick you up and take you to the field. So your parents and you would get up early in the morning. They'd take you to the Walmart parking lot or wherever the pickup site was. You'd all get in the school bus and off you'd go. So you get to the field, everybody gets out of the school bus and you start working. A couple weeks in, I found out that I was one of the only kids on that crew who was getting paid. Most of my coworkers were there as part of community service for juvenile court. Yes, community service is supposed to be community service. This was revenue generating work for a for-profit corporation. That's not community service. That's slavery. That's 13th Amendment. And when it's a government program, that's state-sponsored slavery. That's what that was. Now, I've heard people describe detasseling corn as very difficult labor. I'm just going to say that wasn't my experience with it. It is, to this day, one of the easier jobs that I've ever had. You could put on your Walkman headphones, listen to your music, not have to talk to anybody, didn't have to interact with customers. You didn't have to bend over or pick up anything heavy. So in terms of entry-level jobs, I thought it was pretty chill. I've heard people talk about getting cut by corn leaves. That also was not my experience. The edges of corn leaves are a little bit raspy. They have little serrations, and so they'll kind of catch your skin, they'll kind of get stuck on it, but they don't break the skin. That was very, very rare. Like maybe once or twice over the course of the season, you might get a really shallow paper cut from them. Corn leaves don't really cut you, it just feels a little bit Velcro-y as they go past your skin. And that can, I think, cause people to worry that it's going to cut them, but it doesn't generally. And that will be important later. So the way the workday went, we all show up at the field on a school bus, whatever field we're doing that day. And by the way, these are all family farms. These were plots where seed companies were growing seed corn. That's why we had to detassel the corn for genetics reasons. But the seed companies didn't own these farms. These were family farms in the area that were already growing corn and soybeans, that kind of thing. So the seed companies would just make a deal with these family farmers. Hey, can you grow some seed for us? The family farmers would say, cool. And the seed company would send us as their crews to go work on their properties. I actually have a buddy who grew up on a 1,000-acre family farm in Iowa around this time. And his family actually used some of their land for that. They used some of their land to grow seed for seed companies. So they would have detasseling crews like us come and work on their land. By the way, if you're liking this video, although like might be a strong word for this one, but if you feel like you're learning something with this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe. It really does tell the algorithm to put it out in front of more people and helps the word get out. Appreciate it. So the way that job worked, we'd get on the school bus, they would drive us to whatever field we were working that day, we'd all get off, work for a few hours in the morning, get back on the bus to grab our lunches, drink a bunch of water, get back out of the bus, and we had some porta potties, and then once the lunch break was over, we'd get back to work. The school bus was where we had all the workplace stuff. That's where the first aid kit was and the EpiPen if anybody needed that, and so that was kind of like the mobile HQ for this job crew. Editing Sarah here, popping in to let you know we're about to talk about an assault in the workplace that happened at this corn detasseling gig. So if that's not something you need to be hearing about today, there's a timestamp around here somewhere. Go ahead and skip forward to that. So one day we were finishing up with lunch, everybody had left the school bus and was getting back into the field, and I remembered, oh shoot, I need to go grab some water or something off the bus. I thought everybody had already left for the field, but I found a girl still in the bus when I got there, and she was trying to open the first aid kit, and she was having a really hard time because there was blood everywhere, and I don't know if you knew this, but blood is really slippery. It was a first aid kit for a vehicle, and so it latches really tightly so it doesn't like pop open when you're going over bumps. So she's trying to open this thing and she just can't because her hands are cut up like crazy and there's just like smears of blood all over the first aid kit. So I just said, oh hey, can I help you with that, and helped her get it open. Now bear in mind, I had only turned 14 sometime that summer, so she's got this middle school paramedic trying to help her out. So we got the thing open, cleaned up all the blood, got out the iodine, cleaned her up, got her patched up and everything. And I said, oh hey, by the way, like what happened? And she said, oh, it was the corn leaves, they're kind of sharp. I didn't say anything, but I was like, that's weird. That didn't happen to anybody else. And I said, okay, sure. But on the inside, I thought, that's weird. because there's how many dozens of us and nobody else got their hands cut up by the corn like this. You know, again, the edges of the corn are kind of raspy, but they don't really cut you. Certainly not deep enough to draw lots of blood multiple times. It was happening with her. So I was like, that's weird. Again, 14 years old, just barely, not that smart. And another thing that kind of filled that incident in for me later was running across photos of people who had defensive wounds on their hands. That's when somebody comes at you with a knife and you're trying to stop them and your hands get cut up. I saw those photos and went, I think that's new information for most people, but I had in fact seen that happen to people's hands before. So that is most likely what happened, is she was assaulted at the workplace. Later on in my career as a farm worker, some Latina coworkers let me in on an important fact, which is that when you are a female farm worker, sometimes foremen will lurk outside the porta potties because that is the best way to get women farm workers alone for the purposes of sexually assaulting them. And I think she had also just gone to the porta potties, gone to the bathroom, because she was also one of the last people to get from the bus to the field. So that was probably why. Even at the time, as a 14-year-old who knew nothing, I kind of knew the corn leaves explanation didn't make a lot of sense, but I didn't know what else to fill it in with. And there you go. That whole day, we were in a giant cornfield by ourselves. There was nobody else who came in or out that entire time, which means whoever did that to her was working with us that whole day, and probably the day before that and the days after that, that entire season. Whoever did that to her was with us. Again, that kind of assault in the workplace is very, very common for women who are farm workers, for the same reason that farm workers get honed in on for a lot of other crimes, because a lot of them cannot go to the police. Now, in the case of our crew, we were not immigrants, we were US citizens, but these kids, because they were in juvenile detention, if they were to complain to the police or anybody else and try to make a report, it's very easy for the courts to ignore these kids and believe that they are lying because they're already on the wrong side of the law. You also kind of have to ask yourself, what kind of person goes for these foreman jobs? Hashtag not all foremen, but it's a job where you're outside all day, the pay is not great, there's not necessarily a lot of upward mobility either. So you have to ask yourself what it is that's drawing people to this job. What kind of person would be interested in that? Are there perhaps some fringe benefits? That can be something that draws people to a certain kind of job. That can also be a thing in the mental health, social work, and rehab spaces. Again, hashtag not all social workers, not all caseworkers, but there are some people who seek out those jobs because they're a way to get close to a lot of people who are easy to victimize. And if they tell on you, they won't be believed because they're crazy, because they're addicts, because they're already on the wrong side of the law, or they're undocumented immigrants. Of course they're lying. And when you take those two things together, it's a farm work supervisor job and it's a mental health supervision job, and you put those things together, you are really creating a perfect storm for really bad actors to be attracted to that job because it's a great place to get a hold of people to victimize. Just putting that out there. Now, of course, I think folks want to believe that, well, if it's going to be a farm of healing, then of course we would do background checks and supervise and make sure that kind of thing wouldn't happen. Well, that's going to take a lot of work. I'm just going to tell you, that is a lot of work. That is a lot of supervision. It's a lot of red tape and overhead. Exactly the kind of things that people try to avoid when they move all this mental health treatment onto a farm. Farms are supposed to be simple. Farms are not supposed to be about red tape. Sometimes that's why people want to do those things on a farm, because farms are exempt from all kinds of laws. So when people want to take a thing that doesn't have to happen on a farm and they want to do it on a farm, I'm not saying that's a red flag, but it's a yellow flag. So as someone who works in agriculture, anytime people want to take a thing that doesn't normally happen on a farm and they want to move it to a farm, I would say almost 9 times out of 10, they are just trying to get away from the supervision that this thing normally gets and put on a farm, because then no one will look at you closely. You're far away from law enforcement. You're far away from prying eyes. That's a lot of the appeal for farms for a lot of people. I think a lot of folks don't quite understand that. I'll give you an example of how out of sight, out of mind farms can be. There are about 2 million farm workers in the United States. That's about the same number of waiters and waitresses. I think most people wouldn't realize that because we see waiters and waitresses all the time, don't we? Their job is to interact with us, to bring us our food, right? So we see them all the time. We have the same number of farm workers in this country and no one even realizes they're here. That's just a witness to how powerful the reality is of out of sight, out of mind with things that happen on farms. I think it's also really important to just stop and think for a second about why people would want to take people with mental health problems and addiction issues and stick them on farms right now. The idea that we can fix society by taking all the defective people and putting them on farms and having them work, that's not a new idea. That is super old hat in the United States, actually. It's not original, it's kind of basic. People try it all the time and it never actually works. The people who are working on those farms do not heal, okay? I can guarantee you the juvenile court kids I was working with did not leave those corn farms with better mental health than they came in with, certainly. And if you think those kids came away from that job with more more respect for authority than they came in with? No, absolutely not. As the goody two-shoes of that team, I came away with way less respect for authority than I had when I came on that crew. So I would say absolutely yes, farm work can teach you about real life, but it might not be the lessons about real life that you want people to learn. Probably not the kind of growth that the authority figures were hoping for when they sent us out to that field. The reason that there is always a push in the US for taking undesirable people, for taking society's rejects and sending them out to farms to work is just because farms want free labor. That's it. That's why this very old idea is always being floated again as new. But here's the problem. If agriculture just came out and said, we want cheap labor, that doesn't sound that urgent, right? Everybody wants cheap labor. So what folks in the farm sector like to do is paint ourselves as pastoral. We're different. We're nice. We're outside. And they get away with it because so many people with wealth and affluence in this country either own farmland that they kind of treat as a vacation property. It's the old home place. Maybe it's a vacation home. It's a cottage in the woods, perhaps. And the reason that so many Americans feel good about the countryside is because that's where they go for vacation. It's not because working outside is necessarily good for your soul. Talk to any construction worker and see how that sounds. If we really believe that working outside was good for the soul, then you can get that from working construction, oil rigs, collecting garbage, but it's specifically working on farms that we really seem to think is good for your soul. And I want to be kind here and give people the benefit of a doubt because I think a lot of people do come to this belief innocently, but working on farms is not good for your mental health, okay? It's not therapy. It's one of those things you go to therapy to get over. It's just a job. And just like any job, it's going to be hard. And some things about it are going to make you feel kind of crazy. That's how jobs are. That's why we get paid to do them. The reason so many people feel good about the countryside and that it improves your mental health is because that's where they take their vacations. It's not the countryside doing that for you. It's the fact that you're on vacation, right? You have fewer demands on your time. You're not rushing everywhere. You might be able to sleep in. That's what makes it a vacation. It's not where you are. It's what you're doing. It's what your headspace is. But because so many people have big, powerful, positive feelings towards the countryside, it is very easy to take this idea to them. What if we just put people to work in the countryside and make it sound like a good, beautiful, health-giving idea? When it is not. It's just cheap labor by an underclass that can't get away. And it's being sold as a health tonic. And people believe that because they don't understand the realities of working in agriculture. Farm workers have been talking for a long time about how working on farms is not actually good for your health. And I feel like at this point, if you have completely not absorbed that message, maybe it's because you don't want to hear it. But we should say it anyway. And the problem here is that the people who want cheap labor have a very willing audience, and the people who have good positive feelings about the countryside. We get people who love the countryside so much that they are easy prey for folks selling slavery as a solution. And so it's just really important to me that we all be very clear about what goes on with these rural and farm work programs. They're not job training programs, certainly. When you have a prison work program on farms, all the farm jobs are being filled by prisoners. That's the point. You don't have to hire free people. So they get all these job skills and then they leave and no one wants to hire them because they're not prisoners anymore and you actually have to pay them and nobody wants to do that. You see the problem? These farm jobs are also not making anybody's mental health better. If anything, they're making it much worse because of the way they're victimized on these jobs. My concern is that anything to do with farms we think must automatically be good. And we're so convinced of that we are useful idiots for some of the worst actors in our society. Even when it's a very obvious prisoners with jobs program.
The slaves have armed themselves.
Oh, I don't like that word.
Sorry, the prisoners with jobs have armed themselves.
Okay, that's better. That's better.
I love agriculture. I want agriculture to do well. And the way we get there is by being a little bit smarter than this. Agriculture is a real job. It takes real skills. You cannot just pull any person off the street, especially if they're struggling with some serious personal problems, and expect them to just perform well. By the time you're spending enough money on a farm to make the farm a proper mental health treatment program, you've just built a mental health treatment program. The farm is not really part of it. And if you're making a farm that runs well, you cannot be spending all that money. You cannot have a farm that functions as a farm and a mental health treatment program. You kind of have to pick. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but this is a terrible staffing solution for farms that is being packaged up and sold as an even worse mental health treatment program. It will be bad at both of those things. The idea that going to a farm and working there will heal your soul is just, you have to have grown up in boat shoes to believe that. I don't know what to say. Well, this has been fun. I'm not really sure how to wrap this thing up. I think a lot of folks worry that, wow, this must be a hard story to tell. And yeah, but not for the reason people would think. It didn't really hit me that hard emotionally because, again, I was just too young and dumb to understand what was going on. It was just a weird day at work for me. The hard part of this story and telling it is literally just telling it, right? Because I think a lot of people have a certain idea of how these kinds of assaults are supposed to happen. And if you're talking about reality, the problem is truth is stranger than fiction. And so when you're telling real stories, they're usually not going to fit our stereotypes of how these things happen to people. Also, just because agriculture is a rough place to work, you are constantly being bombarded with unfortunate things happening, from the weather on down. Laugh so you don't cry is a very real thing. That can even come off wrong to people, right? Anytime you're telling a story about a bad thing that happened in agriculture, we try and make it funny. And that just becomes your instinct after a while. It's not always the right thing to do, but you're kind of stuck that way sometimes. And so that can make it a little bit scary to tell these stories just because you're not telling them right. Believe it or not, that is a thing I've run into with this one. It's so funny because people get mad at you because they think you're telling the story wrong. If you're going to be mad at something, there are more useful directions to focus that energy. Maybe be mad at the people who do things like this. The people floating this rehab ranch idea right now are spoiled and careless men. If farm work as healing were a thing that could be done, these are the last people who could pull it off. They don't have the due diligence. They don't have a bone in their body of actually doing follow through on grand ideas that they have. These are the last people who should be trusted with this kind of responsibility. That's especially interesting with RFK Jr. I think he really trades on the whole, hey, I'm a recovering addict thing to kind of get his way into relatability and telling you that he has some insight into how to fix these problems. That's interesting because there's a lot of recovering addicts that I know, and they're some of the most thoughtful people that I know. If you manage to go through an experience like that and fought to come out the other side, they, on a really gut level, understand that things have consequences in a deep and, again, thoughtful way that you don't really often see in a lot of other people sometimes. Obviously, it's not a magic power that you get from struggling with addiction, but that's just something that I've noticed about these people in my life and I really value about them. And that is not something I see in RFK Jr. I do not see a guy who's learned about thinking stuff through. I do not see a guy who's thought about follow through. I do not see a guy who's thought about, we'd better double check before we make a decision. I don't see any of that in him. When I look at RFK and I think about his career and I look for that thoughtfulness, I see an emptiness where that should be. When we talk about health and recovery and especially building long-term health, there's a lot that goes into that I think has just not even shown up on his radar, even though he's supposedly leading a movement that's supposed to be all about that. I see so many holes, deep holes, in his understanding of what that's supposed to look like. It's probably a little bit much to get into his track record of abusing women, and I think there was something about him being on the Epstein flight logs. Double check me on that though. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're just talking about recovery and farms and how they are not the same. Don't get me wrong, you can do both, but it is a lot more work than just doing each one by itself. Well, that is enough from me for now. Y'all do good out there.